I certainly hope we can find an extra $5 billion.
Where are you going to find $5 billion? There is no money.
Making big corporations pay their fair share of taxes.
I think everybody's looking at every fund and trying to be sure we're maximizing.
Texas lawmakers are on the hunt for more money. The historic budget shortfall now has the Senate searching for an extra $5 billion. This morning, we're one-on-one with Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, his hopes in the last 50 days of the session, and his political future beyond, all coming up here on Session 11.
From KXAN Austin News, this is Session 11, live interactive breakdowns, insights, interviews, and our weekly roundtable discussion. You're watching Session 11 on KXAN Austin News.
Well, the last count, we had $2 billion of sustainable income. The goal was $5 billion. None of us were quite sure that we could find $5 billion that was sustainable. If we could find money that would just put us in this same situation next session, we're not sure we wanted to do that.
A Senate budget plan is just days from a Finance Committee vote. Members aim to pump more back into the budget, but as you just heard, the panel tasked to find that extra needed $5 billion might be striking out. Good morning. I'm Robert Hadlock. Thank you for joining us here on Session 11. Senators have pledged to do better than the House, spending billions more on education and health and human services. The Lieutenant Governor's newly appointed Fiscal Matters panel canceled its very first meeting. The vice chair of that group said members just weren't ready, despite a push to have the budget ready to go by the end of this week. KXAN political reporter Josh Hinkle joins us live in the studio. And Josh, even though it looks like things just aren't set yet, the group's preliminary plans have surfaced anyway.
That's right. It's something I blogged about this week. In that document, senators outline about 90 recommendations of how the state can get that extra money. The vice chair says not everything they've looked at will work. It could end up putting the state into the same or a worse condition by the next session, but there are some very interesting suggestions. Texas could gain $111 million by canceling the back-to-school sales tax holiday in tough economic times. It could save another $111 million by releasing nonviolent prisoners eligible for parole and immediate deportation, and the state could see another $50.5 million by boosting traffic fines to $45 from $30. Those, along with the rest of the items on the list, add up to about $5.5 billion. The vice chair also said senators expect to lay out the full budget by the end of the week. That means this revenue search needs to be done by then. This morning, our On Politics poll asks, can senators find at least $5 billion in sustainable non-tax revenue for the budget? Log on to KXAN.com and let us know what you think. And while you're there, click on the On Politics tab at the top and you'll go straight to our special political site where you can find our latest coverage and that blog post I mentioned. And plus, click the blue bar at the top to chat with us this morning. We're talking about this money hunt and the state's financial crisis. Our On Politics panel will field your questions later in the show. And today we've got a great panel of journalists that are covering the Capitol right now. So some great insight right there for you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Josh. Our newsmaker this morning can say the same about the situation. All eyes now on the Texas Senate. The pressure is on Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst to lead the chamber through this funding fight. KXAN's Chris Willis sat down with the man to find out how the Senate plan will work, and also the big decisions he plans to make about his political future after the session.
House Appropriations Chairman Jim Pitt says he hopes the House and Senate can get together, get a better piece of legislation concerning the budget than the House passed. Do you see that happening?
I do. We've worked with the House. We've worked with Jim Pitts before. I think his comments were that he needed some help with the Senate to try and cover what our obligations are in our public schools.
Sure.
And that he was concerned about the fact that the House has a 34% cut in the Medicaid rates for nursing homes. And quite frankly, Chris, that would drive out, there would be no Medicaid provider that could provide a nursing home. And so we'd have a situation where 50 to 60,000 elderly people would be pushed out on the street, and I don't think that's the intent.
Right. Will the House budget pass in the Senate with the cuts that it has now, or what has to be done to kind of jockey and adjust that?
Well, I think each House looks at their role as being obviously independent.
Sure.
And obviously we're going to look at the House budget, but we've already been working on our own budget now for 3 months. So as we're going through this, we've already been going through all the articles. We've been going through both health care and the Medicaid part of the budget and public education, higher education, our public safety. And so we've come up with our own judgments in the Senate on what are our priorities.
Yeah.
And we're going to fund our priorities. And I think you've got to keep in mind that you can cut public education, but unless you change the current law, you still owe that money.
Right.
And the same thing is true with Medicaid.
Yeah.
So I think we have to look at that carefully. And if necessary, in some cases, change current law, but make sure that we're providing the essential services that people want. But Chris, the main thing is, it doesn't make any difference whether it's the House budget, which with state and federal funds is going to cut about, oh, what did staff tell me, about $25 billion?
Yeah.
Or it's a Senate budget, which will still cut a sizable amount of money. And I don't know what the federal dollars are. But from current spending, state dollars,
Yeah.
not including federal dollars, I would think the Senate will be $7, $8, $9 billion below the current spending.
So that puts, the Senate version puts money back into health and human services and education in the tune of, and again, we're talking approximate figures here, $10 billion. So the obvious question is where do we find that money? Where's it going to come from?
Well, it's going to be tough because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that since government has no money, it's the people's money, that we're only funding those programs, Chris, that are really important. Yeah. We've gone through this exercise in 2003 when I came in, and then we went through it last year in 2010, and we're doing it again right now in 2011. And I think it's a healthy process when you go in and say, oh, does this program, not across the board cuts, but does this program within an agency have the same priority today as it did when we passed it?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then we need to cut back on our funding or eliminate our funding altogether. What I'm afraid of is after May 30th and over the next year and a half, if we don't do this right, you're going to have a tsunami in 2012, but it's going to be against the current members.
Right.
All right. If we've got millions of parents that are upset because their kids aren't getting a good education,
right.
If we're pushing 50 to 60,000 elderly people out on the streets, hey, that's not a picture I want to see on your station
Right.
on my watch.
The three key words that we hear a lot of buzz about, rainy day fund. Will the Senate try to use all or part of it? And the governor's support plays a critical role in that. How do you see that?
Well, the governor's support has influence, a little bit more influence with some of the House members.
Sure.
In that we have in the Senate, 50% of my members are on Senate Finance.
Right.
And so I think they understand where we are. And the other 50% we're giving tutorials to on a weekly basis. In the House, they have 16%, 50%, 16%. We've got 3 times larger number as a percentage. And I don't know that they're doing the tutorials. So part of this is just information. And
Right.
I think a lot of the House members are starting to understand that you can't necessarily eliminate certain programs that are important to a lot of people out there. For instance, in slashing Medicaid spending, if you reduce the Medicaid reimbursal rate
Right.
on nursing homes by 34%, and most of your nursing home operators operate on a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% pre-tax margin, everybody's going to be out of business.
Right.
So what do you do with the 50 to 60,000 people, elderly people, that are in nursing home beds and covered under Medicaid? You're going to be pushing them out. Now, some may have families that can take care of them. Some, there are few churches that might be able to take care of them. But by and large, most of these people either don't have family or their family works. Both, well, the husband, the wife.
Sure.
And so how do you take care of them? In public education, it's important that we not spend more than we need to, but we need to support our good teachers, and we need to make sure that we're funding our schools adequately. That's a requirement under the Texas Constitution. Now again, at the end of the day, even in the Senate, we're going to cut from current spending some $7, $8, $9 billion.
Right.
And And if you add in probably, that'll trigger about $10 billion or so federal funds. So we'll probably cut in total 15 to 19 to 18 billion dollars. But in a number of areas, we're going to be higher than the House because we've had more time to study it, more of our members have studied it. And again, we want to make sure that we're funding the essential items at an adequate rate, but not over that.
Tell us about the U.S. Senate.
I think, in fairness to a lot of supporters who've been sitting on their hands and waiting, I need to make a decision in June whether I'm going to run for the U.S. Senate in 2012 or whether I'm going to stay right where I am and run for governor in 2014.
Perfect.
So I'll be, it's not that far away.
Their conversation continues for another 20 minutes or so. We have the entire thing streamed for you on our websites, kxan.com and onpolitics.com. Up next, see what's happening across the Capitol in the House.
Representative Munoz, I noticed that your bill dealt with public junior colleges and public junior college districts. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you bring the bill because you're in junior college?
Hazing House freshmen, a fun yet time-consuming tradition. In a session when every minute matters, some wonder whether members should just focus on the important issues at hand for Texas. That's next on Session 11.